Hey guys, in this video I'm going to show you some examples of exception filters, validation pipes, and custom decorators. For the exception filters, we are going to create a single strategy to manage the application exceptions within a filter class and a decorator to apply that strategy. For the validation pipes, we are going to create a validation class for an ETO, and we are going to also use a decorator to make that work. Finally, we are going to create a custom decorator for our DTO, and we're going to see how to use that in our API. And if you want to deploy your applications in a reliable global infrastructure with a predictable pricing, check out Linode. There is a link in the description below this video. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, and let's get started. The NestJS exception filters can be applied using a decorator in a method or in a controller, or we can globally apply a filter by declaring it in our main TS file. Let's jump into VS Code and let's see how we can use exception filters. On a previous video, we created our shops controller. Basically, here we defined all the different endpoints of our API. We defined a get endpoint, a post, a put, and a delete endpoint. Let's execute the post endpoint, for example. So let's create a new job and let's pass C++ developer as the title. As the salary, we pass 7,000. So let's run this. And okay, so now we created in our MongoDB a new developer. So if we go to the MongoDB database, we're going to see that we can access that document. Here in the jobs database, we have that document. We have C++ developer and the salary as 7,000. Okay, so let's go back. Let's grab this identifier. And with this identifier, we can go to the API and we can get the shop information. Okay, but what happens if we change the identifier? Let's put something random here and we send a request. So we still get a 200 response. And that's not correct for a RESTful API because we want to receive, in this case, when we don't get any results, we're going to get a 404 or an HTTP and not found. So let's make a change in our get endpoint. Let's go back to our controller and let's make a change here in our get endpoint so we can return an HTTP status according to the result. So if we don't get any results from the database, we need to return an not found HTTP response, a 404. So here what we need to do is we need to handle this promise. So we are going to add a then here. And I'm going to create an arrow function to handle this promise response, where I'm going to receive a result. And what I want to do here is, if I get a result, I'm going to return that result. But if we don't get any results, I want to throw an exception. So this will allow us to see how NestJS handles HTTP exceptions by default. And then we are going to create our exception filter, and we're going to see the difference between the two strategies, the NestJS default strategy and the filter strategy with the class that we are going to create. So now what we're going to do here is I'm going to throw an exception, throw new HTTP exception, and I'm going to pass a message, shop not found, and I'm going to pass the HTTP status, and I'm going to return the HTTP status as not found. Actually, the HTTP code is 404. So I'm going to return that. And I'm going to also add a catch block here. I'm going to create another arrow function for this. And here I'm going to throw the same exception. Okay, let's try this now. And now we send the request and we receive a 404 as we expected, and the message that we just entered there. Okay, so this is the default behavior of NestJS. And now I am going to create a filter, and I'm going to centralize the exception management using that filter. And first I'm going to grab this code from the NestJS documentation, and I'm going to customize this filter a little bit. I'm going to create a new folder. This is going to be filters, and I'm going to create a new file. That's going to be http exception.filter.ts. And here I'm going to paste the code that I grabbed from the NestJS documentation website. Okay, basically what it's doing here is implementing the exception filter interface with this HTTP exception filter, is using this catch decorator with this HTTP exception as a parameter. So it's going to catch all the HTTP exceptions depending on the scope that we define. We're going to see that in a second. And here what it's doing is extracting the response, the request, is extracting the status code from the exception, and is generating this response, including the status code and a JSON with the status code, a timestamp, a path, and we can add whatever we want. For example, description, HTTP error, or something like that. Okay, and now what we can do with this filter, this HTTP exception filter that we are going to import into the controller now, import let's copy this HTTP exception filter from filters, HTTP exception filter, and here we can apply this filter at a method level or at a controller level. And in order to do that, we can use a specific decorator that is called use filters, where we can pass a list of filters. In this case, we are going to pass just this one, HTTP exception filter. We can pass it in two ways. If we just pass the class name as it is now, the framework is going to inject, using the dependency injection mechanism, is going to inject the instance of this filter, the instance of this class. Or we can create the instance ourselves like this, and it's going to work either way. So let's just put the class name. So NestJS is going to inject an instance for us. Okay, let's try this now. Let's go back to Postman and let's execute this request on a random with a random identifier that we know that is not in the database. So if I execute this request, now I get the custom JSON that I defined on the filter, as we can see here. That we have a status code, a timestamp, a path, and a description. This description, HTTP error. So that's one way of specifying or applying the filter, right, at the method level. We can also apply the same filter. I'm going to grab this and move it at the controller scope. So if we throw an exception in any of these endpoints, it's going to apply this filter at the controller level. So let's try this now. And if we go back and if we run this, we should get the same response. Yes, we get the same response as before. And if I remove this completely, we can include that exception filter globally in our main file. So I'm going to grab this and I'm going to paste it here. I'm going to import this filter here in our main.js file. I'm going to change the path. And what I can do here is I can do app that use global filters, and here I can pass a list of filters. In this case, I'm going to pass this, only this filter. And here is, here I need to create an instance of it. Okay, and let's go now and let's execute a request again, and we're gonna get the same result. So we applied this filter at a method level, then we applied the same filter using the decorator at a controller level, and finally we created or we applied this filter globally. NestJS validation pipes. We can apply validation pipes using a decorator in a parameter, in a method, or in a controller. Or we can globally apply a validation pipe, declaring it in our main.js file. Let's jump into VS Code and let's see an example of a validation pipe. Okay, now let's create a validation pipe. So as you may remember, NestJS allows us to use DTOs to encapsulate the body that we receive as part of the requests in our endpoints, for example, in our post endpoint. So what we're going to do first, I'm going to stop the server and I'm going to install a couple of dependencies. So I'm going to run npm install save class validator and class transformer. Okay, and the first thing that I need to do here, let's run the server again. I'm going to the DTO, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to import the class validator library, import from class validator, and I'm going to import a couple of decorators. Is string and is int, and I'm going to use these decorators here. Is string and is int. Okay, and using these decorators, I'm going to be able to validate the input. But another thing that I need to add is the actual pipe. So I'm going to create a new folder. Let's call it pipes. And I'm going to grab the validation pipe from the NestJS website. We also have the alternative to use Shoy. Shoy is another library. In this case, we're going to use class validator. Okay, and this is the validation pipe that I want to use. So let's create a new file here. Let's call it validation.pipe.ts, and let's paste the code. And this is going to implement the pipe transform interface, and it's going to make some validations, it's going to make some transformations. And here I'm going to change this to any, so we don't get any errors. Okay. So let's go back to our controller. And here what we can do is we can apply, this is pretty similar to the filters, where we can apply the validation pipe at a method level, a controller level, a global level, and also at a parameter level. So we can actually add the validator here. So that's going to be the first thing that we're going to test. We can add the validate. Let's grab this one. We can use the validation pipe like this, and we need to import it first, actually. So import validation pipe from pipes validation.pipe. And here we are going to validate this shop DTO at the param level. So let's go back to Postman and let's execute a post request, but instead of passing a number, an integer, we're going to pass a string here. So we should get an error. Yeah, we get the HTTP error. Remember that we still have running here in our main.ts file, we still have this exception filter. So we can do something different here. If we go back to the pipe, we're going to see that what we are throwing here is a bad request exception. So we can copy this exception. This is not a good practice, but just for the sake of giving an example of this, I'm going to copy and paste. Of course, we need to create a superclass, we need to extend it, we need to try to don't repeat ourselves, but just for the sake of the example, I'm going to copy and paste this. I'm going to rename this, and I'm going to call it validation exception filter.ts. And here I'm going to catch this bad request exception. And let's make a couple of changes here. Yes, I need to import this. Okay. Here we can say bad request. Okay, let's save this. And now if we go back to the main.ts file, we can use that filter. So let's import it. This is bad. Let's grab it from here. Actually, I'm going to rename this one. to validation filter or validation exception filter. That's going to be better. And I'm going to import that here. Validation exception filter, and I need to change this. This is going to be validation exception data filter, and I'm going to use this one. Okay, now if we go back to Postman and we execute the same request, we should get a different description. I'm going to run this, and we get the description that we specified for that exception specifically. So in this case, we are using two things. We are using this validation pipe, and we are using also a validation exception filter. And if we go back to the controller, we can also define this validator, or we can apply this validator at the method level. We can say, this is use pipes, and we can pass, this is the validation pipe actually. Yeah. So if we execute the request again, we should get the same response. Yes. We get a bad request, and we get the description that we specified on the filter for the validation exceptions. And we can also use pipes at the controller level. So let's do that. And let's go back to Postman and let's run this again. And we're going to get the same response. And if we remove this from here, I'm going to save this. I'm going to grab the validation pipe, and I'm going to include this validation pipe globally in our main.ts file. I'm going to change the path, and I'm gonna use here app.use global pipes, and I'm going to include the name of the pipe. I need to create a new instance of the validation pipe actually. Validation pipe. And now if we go back to Postman and if we run the same request, we should get the same response. NestJS custom decorators. We can create a custom decorator to be more specific regarding the request that we receive in our endpoints. And custom decorators will allow us to improve the code readability of our application. It's going to improve the reusability. And we can also apply pipes on these custom decorators, for example, a validation pipe. Or we can also access a particular property from our custom decorator. A custom decorator can also be useful if we need to pass the data of an authenticated user in multiple endpoints. So let's go to VS Code and let's create a custom decorator for our API. Okay, and now let's create a custom decorator. So I'm going to create a new folder. Decorators, and I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call this showdata.decorator.ts. And here what I'm going to do is I'm going to import a function. The function is create param decorator from the NestJS common library. NestJS common library. Okay. And here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new constant, show data, and I'm going to use that function to create my custom decorator. The idea is to use this decorator instead of using body here. Let's go back to the controller. So instead of using @body as the decorator, I want to use @shopData. So it's not just a generic body, it's a specific request that I'm going to describe there, right? I'm going to describe this shop DTO data. So let's go back to the decorator, and here is going to, this function is going to receive an arrow function where I'm going to receive a data. I'm going to receive a data argument. It's going to be a string, and then the request. And here what I'm going to do is I'm going to return if I get data, I'm going to return the body of the request. I'm going to add a condition here to check that I received the data. Break that body data. And in the other case, I'm going to return the body completely. Okay, let's go back to the controller, and I'm going to import that custom decorator. So import show data from decorators show data.decorator. And now I can use that decorator here, for example. I'm going to call it show data. And now I should be able to create a new job as usual. So let's say Java developer 8000. Let's run this. And I am able to create it. And we still have our validation pipe and our validation exception filter running. So if I pass this as a string, I should get an error. Yes, I get the same error as before. So it's still running. I'm going to comment this. And I'm going to apply this validation pipe at this level, at the param level, so I can pass it here. And if I run this request again, I should get the same error. Yeah, I get the error, but I'm not wrapping, I'm not using the custom exception, so I'm going to add that exception here. So I'm going to use the filter, use filters, and I'm going to pass the, let me go back to the main.ts, this one, validation exception filter. I'm going to pass that one. Okay, I think I have to import it. Okay, let's grab this from here. Let's go back to the controller and let's paste it here. Let's paste it here and I need to change the path. Yes, like that. Okay, and now we should get the error and we should get the JSON that we specified here with this button request in the description. So let's go back to Postman and let's run this again. And yes, we get the JSON that we specified on that validation exception filter. So if we go back to, let me close everything here. So if we go back to the controller, to the shops controller here, we are using a custom decorator with a validation pipe, and we are also using the validation filter or the exception filter here at the method level. So that's all I have for today. Thank you guys for watching. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And I see you guys in the next one. Take care. Bye.